When I video chatted my son to ask about his wedding plans, my daughter-in-law, Elena, looked at me with a cruel smile and said, "Oh, we already got married yesterday. We only invited those who really matter." Those words hit me like ice on my back. But before continuing, make sure you're subscribed to the channel and share your thoughts in the comments. Where are you watching this video from? We love to hear how far our stories go. My name is Sonia. I'm 68 years old, and I discovered the hard way that love and money, when mixed, can poison even the deepest family bond. For 35 years, I raised my son Carlos alone after losing my husband in a car accident when our son was just 8 years old. I saved every penny, worked 2 jobs, and gave up many dreams to give him a decent education and a comfortable start in life. Carlos was always a sensitive and intelligent child. I remember him at 10 years old sitting at the kitchen table focused on his math homework, wondering if we could one day travel to the beach. I promised him I would, even though I knew the money was meant for his school books. His grades were exemplary, and when he was accepted to college, I cried with pride. My sacrifice had been worth it. He met Fernanda during his sophomore year of college. She was pretty articulate and came from a wealthy family, or at least that's something she always made a point of mentioning. From the start, I noticed how her eyes sparkled when she talked about international travel and designer clothes. I ignored the discomfort I felt. After all, my son was happy. The relationship progressed quickly. They were soon planning to live together, and that's when the first emergencies arose. The apartment they had rented needed a deposit they didn't have. "It's just this once, Mom," Carlos assured me, asking for $3,000. I took them out of my retirement fund, the same one I'd nurtured for decades working as a nurse. A week after the move, the refrigerator broke down. Another $2,500 came out of my savings. The following month, Fernanda lost her job and they needed help with the rent. "Just until I find something new," Carlos explained. Thus began a cycle that would last 4 years, a pattern of emergencies that always ended with money leaving my account and going into their pockets. During that time, I noticed subtle changes in my son's behavior. Visits became more infrequent and always coincided with a new financial need. The calls, once daily, became weekly, then bi-weekly, and always ended with some request. "Mom, the car broke down." "Mom, we need to replace the sofa." "Mom, the credit card is maxed out." Sir. Meanwhile, I was watching the social media channels I learned to use specifically to keep up with my son's life: photos of him dining at expensive restaurants, shopping for new clothes, and taking short weekend trips. Each photo was like a stab in my heart, but I kept telling myself it was normal, that young people have different priorities, that maybe they were just taking advantage of promotions or receiving gifts from friends. My neighbor Cecilia, a widow like me, was the first to warn me. "Sonia, don't you find it strange that your son only shows up when he needs money?" She defended Carlos tooth and nail. "He's building his own life, Cecilia. It's normal to need help at first." She just shook her head and changed the subject, but the seed of doubt had already been planted. Little by little, my life reorganized around their needs. I canceled doctor's appointments so I could transfer money to them for unexplained emergencies. I stopped buying my arthritis medication to pay the down payment on the new car they decided to buy. I started eating less, even saving on bread so they could balance their accounts after a month of excessive spending. And I did all this with a smile on my face, convinced it was my duty as a mother. When joint pain kept me awake at night because I had stopped taking my medication, I consoled myself with the thought of my son's smile, imagining the comfortable life I was helping him build. My once well-maintained house began to show signs of neglect. The kitchen ceiling developed a leak that I didn't have the money to fix. The stove only worked with 2 burners. The washing machine had broken down months ago, and I washed my clothes by hand, even though arthritis made every movement painful. Last spring, Carlos called me to tell me that he and Fernanda were engaged. My heart filled with joy, and for a moment, I forgot all the difficulties. My son was getting married. I immediately began planning how I could help them. Maybe sell some jewelry I'd saved from my mother. Maybe make some sweets for the reception and save on the banquet. Fernanda called me the next day. "Sonia, we're thinking about something intimate maybe in the countryside. I found a perfect dress, but it's a little over our budget." Before she finished, I knew where the conversation was going. "How much, my love?" I asked, mentally calculating how much I'd have left in my savings after another withdrawal. $7,000. She replied casually, as if she were talking about the price of a cup of coffee. I swallowed. It was more than I'd earned in 2 months of retirement, but it was my only son's wedding. "I'll see what I can do," I replied, knowing I'd do anything to see him happy on such a special day. Wedding preparations consumed the following months. Each call brought a new expense, a new small favor I could do to help. The wedding dress, the rings, the banquet, the flowers, everything needed my financial contribution. Meanwhile, I had already sold my car and some family jewels and was considering taking out a bank loan, even though I knew I'd be paying exorbitant interest on my retirement for years. I bought a pale pink dress to wear on the big day. It wasn't expensive, I found it on clearance, but it was elegant and understated perfect for the mother of the groom. I spent a little more on shoes, a small luxury I allowed myself after saving on breakfast for weeks. I pictured myself in the photos next to my son, proud and happy for having managed to raise him alone up to that point. The official invitation never came. It seemed strange to me, but I figured that with so much preparation, they might have missed that detail. Or maybe being the mother of the groom, she didn't need a formal invitation. I called Carlos 3 weeks before the date they had mentioned to confirm the details. "Mom, I'm so glad you called," he said, and for a moment I heard the old Carlos, the boy who'd run into my arms when he fell off his bike. "We need to talk about the wedding." I felt a chill run down my spine. Something in his tone sounded off. "Sure, son. Is everything okay? Do you need anything else?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. I heard a whisper. Fernanda was there saying something to him. Then in a voice that didn't sound like his own, Carlos said, "Actually, we're thinking of postponing it. Things are complicated, you know how it is." I felt a moment of relief. Postponing wasn't canceling. Maybe they realized they were spending too much, that they needed to be more responsible. "Sure, son, you should do what you think is best. Don't worry about me." 3 days later, while scrolling through social media before bed, a habit I'd developed to feel closer to my son, I saw something that chilled my blood. A photo of Carlos and Fernanda beaming in their wedding dresses, surrounded by smiling guests. The caption read, "The best day of our lives, thank you to everyone who made this moment so special." The photo had been posted that same day. They hadn't postponed the wedding. I simply hadn't been invited. I spent the night awake, phone in hand, unable to dial my son's number. What would I say? How would I ask him why I wasn't invited to the wedding I helped finance? How does a mother question her son about such a rejection without seeming accusatory or worse, desperate? The next morning, still without a response, I decided to go to his apartment. Maybe there was an explanation. Maybe an invitation had gone missing. Maybe there was a second event planned, a more intimate reception for close family. I rang the doorbell and waited, my heart beating so loudly I thought they could hear it through the door. It was Fernanda, who answered wearing a silk robe I had bought her for Christmas. Her face showed surprise and something else. Irritation. "Sonia, what a surprise. Carlos isn't home. He went out to take care of some work." I saw the wedding photos, I said, my voice firmer than I expected. "From yesterday." Fernanda opened the door a little wider, but not enough to invite me in. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. Ah, that's it. It was a very intimate thing. You know, we decided to do something small, just for the people we're really close to. Those words hit me like a slap in the face. People we're really close to. After 4 years of supporting them, after emptying my savings for her dress, for the rings, for the banquet, I wasn't considered really close. I understand, I said, although I understood nothing. And when exactly did you decide to have this intimate wedding? She looked at her wristwatch, another gift from me, with barely concealed impatience. It was a last-minute decision, very rushed. We didn't want to bother anyone with the preparations. You know how it is. At that moment, Carlos appeared in the hallway behind her. Our eyes met, and for the first time in my life, I saw my son look away, unable to meet my gaze. It wasn't guilt I saw in his eyes, but shame. Not for having excluded me, but for having been found out. "Mom," he said, approaching the door. "We weren't expecting you today." "Clearly," I replied, just as I wasn't expecting to see photos of their wedding on social media without being invited. An awkward silence fell. Fernanda looked at Carlos as if she expected him to resolve the situation. He cleared his throat nervously. "It was a very simple thing, Mom. Just the godparents and a few close friends. Fernanda's parents were traveling and couldn't make it either." I later discovered that was a lie. Her parents were in the photos, smiling proud, exactly as I should have been. "I understand," I repeated, though each of their words only deepened my confusion and pain. "Well, I came to wish you happiness then. Congratulations on the wedding." I turned to leave, but before I could take 2 steps, Fernanda called after me. When I turned around, I saw a different smile on his face. No longer defensive, but calculating. "Since you're here, Sonia, there's something we wanted to talk to you about. We're having some difficulties with the rent this month. With all the wedding expenses, you know how it is. Could you help us out one more time?" It was at that moment that something inside me snapped. A sudden painful clarity took hold of my mind, as if a veil had been lifted from my eyes. I wasn't a mother to them. I was an ATM with feelings. Walking home that day was like walking through a dream. The streets seemed strange, people's faces were blurs, and my thoughts spun in endless circles. In my head, I relived every moment of the past 4 years, every bank transfer, every promise, every excuse. The pattern was so obvious now that I wondered how I'd been so blind for so long. I sat at the kitchen table, the same table where Carlos had done his chores, where I'd counted coins during the toughest months, where I'd written all those checks for emergencies that were never really emergencies. In front of me, I spread out all the bank statements I'd meticulously kept. The math was brutal in its simplicity. Over the course of 4 years, I had transferred $52,000 to Carlos and Fernanda. Money from my retirement, from my life savings, from the insurance my husband had left to guarantee me a dignified old age. To put it in perspective, it was more than I'd earned in 3 years of retirement. With that money, they'd bought a new car, furnished an apartment, taken weekend trips, dined at expensive restaurants, bought designer clothes, and finally celebrated a wedding I wasn't invited to. Meanwhile, I'd canceled my supplemental health plan, postponed dental treatments, ignored the leak in my kitchen ceiling, and sometimes ate only once a day to save money. I recalled a particularly cold night last winter when I realized I didn't have enough money to fill up my gas tank. I had just wired Carlos $1,200 because his car was in desperate need of repair. That night, I had slept in 3 shirts huddled under my blankets, trying to convince myself that the sacrifice was worth it, that this was what mothers did. The phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. It was Carlos. For a moment, I allowed myself to believe he was calling to apologize, to explain that it had all been a terrible misunderstanding, that he'd realized his mistake. and was sorry for having excluded me from the most important day of his life after everything I'd done for him. "Mom," he began, his voice strangely formal, "about earlier today. You showed up unexpectedly, and we didn't get a chance to explain properly. Explain what, Carlos, why wasn't your mother invited to your wedding?" There was a pause, and then, "It was a last-minute thing, very intimate, and we knew you wouldn't approve of the way we did it. No church, no formalities." It was such an obvious lie, it was insulting. The photos on social media showed an elaborate ceremony with at least 50 guests, flowers everywhere, and an elegant banquet. None of it had been improvised. And about the money, I continued, surprising myself with the firmness in my voice. "The money they asked me for the wedding, they said they were going to postpone for the $7,000 dress I helped pay for the banquet, for the rings. Mom, you know how expensive weddings are these days. We did the best we could with the limited budget we had." Limited budget. The words echoed in my mind like a cruel joke. They'd spent more on the wedding than I earned in a year. "So, about the rent?" Carlos continued, as if we were having a normal conversation, as if I hadn't just confirmed that I was deliberately excluded from his wedding. "We're really tight this month. I promise it'll be just this once." It was at that moment that something shifted inside me. A warmth began to spread through my chest. It wasn't anger, although there was plenty of that, but a strangely liberating feeling. It was as if the invisible cords tying me to a destructive cycle had been cut all at once. "No," I replied simply. "What do you mean, no?" The surprise in his voice was almost comical. "I'm not going to transfer money to you anymore. I'm not going to pay your rent. I'm not going to finance your life." "Mom, you're being unreasonable. They need to learn to live on what they earn," I interrupted. "They need to understand that money doesn't grow on trees or magically emerge from their elderly mother's bank account. Is this about the wedding? Are you throwing a tantrum because we didn't invite you?" The accusation was so unfair, it made me laugh, a harsh, bitter sound that even I didn't recognize. "No, Carlos. This is for 4 years of manipulation. This is for you using me like a bank while treating me like a stranger. This is because I finally realize I deserve more than this." He tried to argue, he tried to make me feel guilty. He tried to convince me I was overreacting. He tried all the tactics that had worked so well for him in the past. But something fundamental had changed. The spell was broken. When I hung up the phone, my hands were shaking, but not from fear or doubt. It was pure adrenaline, the feeling of finally being free of a weight I'd carried for so long that I'd forgotten what it was like to live without it. That night, I did something I hadn't done in years. I called my friend Elena, a fellow nurse I'd lost touch with when my life began to revolve exclusively around Carlos and Fernanda's needs. "Sonia?" Her voice was filled with genuine surprise. My God, how long did something happen? And so, sipping tea in my kitchen with the leaky roof, I told Elena the whole story. I told her about the 4 years of loans that were never repaid, about the wedding I wasn't invited to, about the sudden painful clarity that had come when Fernanda, without even inviting me in, had asked me for more money. Elena listened silently, occasionally shaking her head or squeezing my hand. When I finished, he sighed deeply. "Do you know what the saddest thing about all this is, Sonia? It's not even the money. It's the fact that your son lost the chance to have a real relationship with you. He traded her for material things, for appearances, for a life he clearly can't afford." In the following days, my phone rang non-stop. Carlos, Fernanda, unknown numbers, probably friends of theirs, instructed to call me and try to convince me to change my mind. I let them all go to voicemail. I needed that time alone to gather my thoughts, to strengthen my resolve, before facing the inevitable attempts at manipulation that would follow. On Wednesday, a week after the wedding incident, I decided it was time to take practical steps. First, I went to the bank. The manager, Mr. Mendez, knew me well. He had processed countless transfers to Carlos's account over the years. "Ma'am Sonia, it's nice to see you," she said, standing up to greet me. "How can I help you today? Another transfer for your son." "No, Mr. Mendez. In fact, I'm here to cancel all the automatic transfers I have scheduled for my son's account. And I'd also like some information on how to better protect my savings." The surprise on his face was momentary, but noticeable. For 4 years, I had been the devoted mother who regularly transferred money to her son, often at the expense of her own well-being. This sudden change must have seemed completely out of place. "May I ask if everything is okay, Ms. Sonia? Was there a problem?" "Let's just say I finally opened my eyes, Mr. Mendez," I replied with a calmness that surprised me. "And I'm learning to take care of myself." He nodded without asking any further questions and proceeded to cancel all automatic transfers. He also instructed me on how to block attempts to access my account and enrolled me in a security notification program for any suspicious activity. When I left the bank, I felt strangely light. It was as if a huge weight had been lifted from my shoulders. Not just the financial burden, but the psychological weight of being constantly manipulated, of living in fear of disappointment, of sacrificing my own well-being to sustain an illusion. My next stop was a doctor's office. I'd been putting off appointments for months because the money was always earmarked for some emergency for Carlos and Fernanda. Now finally, I've scheduled all the tests I'd neglected. Bone densitometry mammogram, complete blood work appointment with a specialist for my arthritis. The doctor frowned when he learned I had stopped my arthritis medication for financial reasons. "Ms. Sonia, this is very serious. You're a nurse. You know this type of treatment shouldn't be interrupted." "I know that, doctor. But sometimes we make irrational decisions when we think we're protecting those we love." He looked at me with understanding and prescribed a new, more modern and effective medication. "This should help with the pain, but it doesn't replace the treatment you missed. We'll have to monitor her closely." I left the appointment with a list of tests to schedule and a new medication schedule. For the first time in years, my health had become a priority. It was a strange feeling, almost as if I was doing something forbidden. I had to remind myself repeatedly that taking care of myself wasn't selfish, it was a necessity. That night, Elena came to dinner with me. She brought food knowing my stove wasn't working properly and a bottle of wine. We sat on my small balcony, the night air softening the heat of the day. "How are you feeling?" she asked, pouring me a glass of red wine. Strange, I confessed. Guilty relieved, sad free. All at the same time. "It's normal. You're grieving for a relationship you thought you had but that never really existed. It's like losing someone twice." I pondered this as I watched the dark liquid swirl in my glass. Elena was right. I wasn't just losing my son right now. I was losing the idea I had of him, the illusion I had nurtured for so long. "Do you know what the hardest part is?" I asked. "It's not even the money. It's knowing that even with all the sacrifice, even giving up my own health and comfort, I was never truly important to them. I was just useful." Elena took my hand, her eyes full of compassion. "And that's exactly why you need to walk away. Not for the money, but for your dignity, for your soul." That same night, we received an unexpected visitor. It was almost 10 o'clock when the doorbell rang. Elena and I exchanged worried glances. Who would come so late? Through the door viewer, I saw Fernanda alone, looking strangely vulnerable without her usual confident expression. For a moment, I considered not answering, but then I thought that maybe, just maybe, she had come to apologize. "Sonia?" she said as soon as I opened the door. Her voice trembled slightly. "Sorry to be so late, but it's important." I didn't invite her in. I just waited for her to continue. "It's about the rent. We're really desperate. The landlord threatened to evict us if we don't pay by Friday. Carlos is working overtime, but it won't be enough." There was no mention of the wedding, no apology for excluding me, no acknowledgement of how much they'd hurt me. It was just another plea for money disguised as an emergency. "How much?" I asked in a neutral voice. $3,200? She replied, seeming relieved that I hadn't slammed the door in her face. "I promise this is the last time we order." Things are tough for everyone, you know how it is. I looked at her, really looked at her maybe for the first time. She was wearing a new coat. I could see the label of an expensive brand still hanging from the sleeve. Her hair was perfectly combed, her nails freshly manicured. There was nothing about her to suggest real financial hardship, only the inconvenience of having to adjust the lifestyle they'd created at the expense of my retirement. "Fernanda?" I said, my voice surprisingly calm. "Do you remember what you told me when I went to your house and found out about the wedding?" She looked confused for a moment, then uncomfortable. "I don't know what you're talking about. You said the wedding was only for special people." "Do you remember that his face paled slightly?" "Sonia, that wasn't quite right. You misunderstood." "No, I understood perfectly," I interrupted. "And now I only help special people too. And apparently, just as I wasn't special enough for your wedding, you're not special enough to take my money." Her expression changed instantly. The mask of vulnerability fell away, revealing the cold rage beneath. "You can't do that. We're your family." "Family?" I repeated, feeling a strange calm envelop me. "Family doesn't use people, Fernanda. Family doesn't manipulate. Family doesn't exclude. What you did wasn't acting like family. It was acting like parasites." The expression on Fernanda's face when I closed the door is etched in my memory. It wasn't sadness or regret. It was pure indignation, as if I had broken some implicit contract between us. As if the money were her right, not a favor I was granting her. "My God," said Helena, who had witnessed everything from the living room. She didn't even try to apologize for the wedding. "Because in his head there's nothing to apologize for," I replied, feeling strangely at peace. In his view, I'm just a resource to be exploited, not a person with feelings. That night, after Helena left, I sat on my bed and cried. Not because of Fernanda or her visit, but because of the son he'd lost. Not because of physical death, but because of the loss of the relationship, the trust, the mutual respect I'd naively believed we had. In the following days, the attempts at contact intensified. Carlos called constantly, leaving voicemails that ranged from pleas to accusations. "Mom, you can't just cut us off like that out of the blue," one message read. "We have bills to pay, commitments. You've always helped us. I don't understand why you're acting like this now." In another. "Is this about the wedding? We were going to tell you, but it all happened so fast. You're being irrational. And it hurt the most. If you really cared about us, you wouldn't leave us in this situation. What kind of mother does this to her own son?" That last message made me sit back on the couch, breathless, as if I'd been punched in the stomach. What kind of mother does that? The question echoed in my mind, mingling with another much more painful one. What kind of son does what you did to me? On Saturday, 2 weeks after cutting off financial support, I had an unexpected visitor. I was in the kitchen making coffee when the doorbell rang. Through the door, viewer, I saw 3 people: Carlos, Fernanda, and an older man in a suit I didn't know. I opened the door just a few inches, keeping the security chain on. "Yes." Mom? Carlos began, his voice strangely formal. This is Dr. Figueiredo, a psychiatrist, and he's here to talk to you about your condition. My condition? I repeated, perplexed. The man in the suit stepped forward, smiling in a way that was meant to be comforting, but only seemed condescending. Madame? Sonia, your son and daughter-in-law are very concerned about the recent changes in your behavior. Impulsive behavior, paranoia, social withdrawal. These are worrying signs that warrant professional attention. At that moment, I understood the plan. They weren't there to apologize. They were there to declare me mentally incompetent to take control of my finances under the guise of protecting me. Shock gave way to outrage and then to icy calm. Dr. Figueiredo, I said, keeping my voice steady. I'm a retired nurse. I worked for 30 years at San Lucas Hospital in the geriatric ward. I'm well aware of the signs of cognitive decline, and fortunately, I'm not showing any. What I am showing is a delayed but necessary sense of self-preservation. The doctor seemed momentarily puzzled, but quickly recovered. Ms. Sonia, denial is common in these cases. Perhaps we can come in and talk more comfortably. That won't be necessary. If you're truly concerned about my mental health, I suggest you schedule an appropriate appointment at your office with a time and a file. Not through a surprise visit accompanied by people who have a direct financial interest in declaring me incapable. Fernanda took a step forward, her impatience visible. Sonia, we don't have time for this. You're not okay. Anyone can see that. You cut off your own family over a misunderstanding about a wedding. It wasn't a misunderstanding, Fernanda, I replied calmly. You deliberately excluded me from the wedding I helped pay for, and then you came back to ask for more money as if nothing had happened. That's not paranoia, it's facts. Carlos intervened, his voice oscillating between frustration and false concern. Mom, you're confused. We'll explain the wedding to you. It was a small, intimate affair, with 50 guests, including Fernanda's parents. I filled it up. I saw the photos, Carlos. They lied to me, they excluded me, and then they kept lying. And now they're trying to declare me mentally incompetent because I cut off the flow of money. Dr. Figueiredo looked from Carlos to me, clearly reassessing the situation. Ms. Sonia, your son, mentioned erratic financial behavior. He said you used to help them regularly and suddenly stopped without explanation. Doctor, I replied, looking directly at him. In the last 4 years, I transferred over $42,000 of my retirement funds to my son and daughter-in-law. I have all the receipts and bank statements. During that time, I postponed medical care, lived with a leaky roof and structural problems in the house, and sometimes cut back on meals to help them. I recently discovered I was excluded from their wedding, which I had contributed financially to. At that moment, I realized I was being exploited and decided to stop. That's not erratic behavior, it's self-preservation. The doctor seemed genuinely surprised. It was obvious that the story he'd heard was very different from reality. Mom, you're distorting everything, Carlos protested, but his voice had lost its conviction. Dr. Figueiredo. I continued to ignore my son. I suggest you question your patients more carefully before making house calls based on partial information. And now, if you'll excuse me, I have things to do. I started to close the door, but Carlos put his foot in my way. Mom, you can't just cut us off like that. We have bills. We have responsibilities. And now you'll have to face them like adults, I replied, pushing the door harder. Just like I faced mine when your father died and I had to raise you alone. This isn't going to stay like this. Fernanda threatened, her face contorted with rage. We have rights. You have responsibilities as a mother. My responsibility as a mother was to raise a son until he was 18. I replied, surprisingly calm. Mission accomplished. Anything beyond that was generosity, a generosity you mistook for obligation. I closed the door trembling, but determined. Through the wood, I could still hear Fernanda shouting threats and Carlos trying to calm her down. I leaned back against the door and slid to the floor, hugging my knees like a child. I didn't cry. The tears had dried. What I felt was a strange mixture of sadness and relief. Sadness at the final loss of the son she thought she had. Relief at finally seeing the truth, however painful it was. That visit was a turning point. They had shown how far they were willing to go. They tried to declare me mentally incompetent in order to regain access to my money. It wasn't just about emotional manipulation or little lies anymore. It was something more sinister, calculated, cruel. The following Monday, I made 2 important decisions. First, I consulted a lawyer, Dr. Mireles, who specializes in the rights of the elderly. I explained the entire situation to her. I showed her the account statements, the transfer records, the text messages demanding more money. Miss Sonia, she told me after hearing my story, that what you faced is a classic case of domestic financial abuse. Unfortunately, it's much more common than people imagine, especially against widowed mothers. What can I do to protect myself? We'll prepare complete documentation of the transfer history and the attempt to declare you incompetent. We'll also request a temporary restraining order prohibiting your son and daughter-in-law from approaching you or your residence without prior invitation. A restraining order against my own son? I muttered, the reality of the situation hitting me with new force. I never imagined it would come to this. Dr. Mireles looked at me sympathetically. Miss Sonia, I know it's painful, but you need to understand that what they did, trying to declare you incapable of controlling your money, is a serious form of abuse. You're not only protecting yourself financially, but also legally and emotionally. The second decision I made was perhaps the most difficult, but also the most liberating. Deciding to sell my house. The house where I had raised Carlos, where I kept memories of my late husband, where I had spent my entire adult life. It was a drastic decision, but necessary for several reasons. First, the house was falling into disrepair. The leaky roof, the problematic plumber, the antiquated electrical system, these were expensive repairs I had put off for years so I could help Carlos and Fernanda. Second, the house was too big for me alone, and it cost more to maintain than I could comfortably afford in my retirement. And third, perhaps most importantly, the house held many painful memories, now many ghosts of a past that no longer existed. I found a small apartment in a quiet neighborhood near the park where I used to take Carlos as a child. It was a 2-bedroom ground-floor apartment with a small balcony and a communal garden. The price was reasonable, and with the sale of my house, I'd have enough money not only to buy the apartment outright, but also to build a comfortable emergency fund and maybe even take a trip, something I'd never done in my life. When the for sale sign went up in the front yard, I felt a pang of nostalgia, but also a strange sense of liberation. It was like closing one chapter of my life for good and making room for a new one. News of the sale reached Carlos quickly, as I knew it would. Our neighborhood was small, and people talked. He showed up at my door the next day, just this once, his face a mask of indignation and concern. "Mom, you can't sell the house," he said, without even acknowledging me. "This house is part of our family. It's where I grew up. It's where Dad lived. How can you just get rid of it?" "Good morning to you too, Carlos," I replied, keeping the door only partially open. "And yes, I can sell the house because it's mine. Your name isn't on the deed, but one day it would be mine. You always said you'd leave everything to me." And there it was, starkly exposed, the expectation of inheritance that had colored our interactions for years. He wasn't concerned about family memories or my well-being. He was worried about the property he believed was rightfully his. The house needs repairs I can't afford, I explained calmly. It's too big for me alone and costs too much to maintain. I found an apartment that better suits my current needs. Then let us live here, he proposed, as if offering a great solution. Fernanda and I can move here, take care of the house, make the necessary repairs. And where would I live? He hesitated for only a second, but it was enough to confirm what I already suspected. He hadn't thought about it, or worse, he had thought about it and didn't care. You could stay in the back room, he finally suggested. Or maybe rent a small place with the money you'd save by not paying the house bills. I felt a wave of nausea. My own son was suggesting I move into the back room of my own house, or worse, pay rent elsewhere so he and Fernanda could live for free on the property I'd earned with decades of hard work. The house is already for sale, Carlos. The decision has been made. You can't do this, he insisted, his voice rising. This house is as much mine as it is yours. I have rights. What rights exactly? I asked, feeling a strange calm wash over me. You didn't pay for this house. You didn't support it. You didn't contribute anything to this property. Your only rights are the ones you made up in your head. He looked at me as if I were a stranger, as if he didn't recognize the woman in front of him. And maybe he didn't. The mother he knew, the mother he'd manipulated for years, would have given in, would have cried, would have felt guilty. This new version of me, firm and resolute, was a surprise to both of us. You're going to regret this, she threatened, her face red with rage. When you're old and alone with no one to care for you, you'll regret having us apart. Carlos, I replied, keeping my voice steady despite the pain his words caused me. I'm alone now. The difference is that this time, it's by choice, not by neglect. And as for taking care of me, you've repeatedly proven that you only care about what you can get out of me, not my well-being. He stormed off, slamming the gate so hard that the hinge broke one more item on the list of repairs he'd no longer have to make. I watched him walk away, feeling a mixture of sadness and relief. Each confrontation was painful, but also liberating. Every time I stood my ground, my new identity grew stronger. The house sold surprisingly quickly, just 3 weeks after it was put on the market. The price was better than I expected, thanks to the prime location despite the structural issues. The buyer was a young couple with a young daughter, exactly like my husband and I had been when we bought the house so many years ago. There was something poetic about that cycle, something comforting. On moving day, Elena and some other friends I'd recently reconnected with came to help me. It was a sunny Saturday morning, and there was a sense of renewal in the air. While the movers carried the furniture to the truck, I checked the house one last time to make sure I hadn't forgotten anything important. In Carlos's old room, now empty except for a few boxes, I found something I hadn't seen in years, the old teddy bear he had loved as a child. It had been hidden at the back of the closet, forgotten when he left home. I held the toy for a moment, remembering the child Carlos had been sweet, loving, grateful. Where had that little boy gone? At what point had he become the calculating, manipulative man I knew now? Perhaps I would never know the answer. Maybe the transformation had been gradual, imperceptible, fueled as much by my own actions, my willingness to sacrifice everything for him, to never set clear boundaries, as by outside influences like Fernanda's. Or maybe that sweet little boy had never really existed except in my mind, as a mother eternally determined to see the best in her son. I put the teddy bear in one of the donation boxes. There was no point in holding on to the memories of someone who no longer existed. It was time to move on. As I closed the front door of the house for the last time, handing the keys to the real estate agent, I felt a wave of conflicting emotions. Nostalgia for the good times, sadness for lost memories, relief at leaving behind the backdrop of so much manipulation and pain. But above all, I felt hope, a feeling that had become foreign to me in recent years. Hope for the new chapter that was about to begin. Hope for a simpler, more authentic life surrounded by people who truly cared about me. Hope for a future where I was the protagonist of my own story, not a supporting character in Carlos and Fernanda's. My new apartment was small, but bright and cozy. The freshly painted walls, a soft yellow, brought a sense of warmth and newness. The balcony overlooked the communal garden, where senior citizens played dominoes on Sunday afternoons, and children played under the watchful supervision of their parents. It was a living place full of possibilities. The first few nights, I confess, I cried not out of regret for the move, but out of mourning for the lost relationship with my son. Despite all the manipulation, despite the financial exploitation, despite his cruelty in recent months, he was still my son, the child I had carried in my womb, breastfed, taught to walk and talk. Cutting that tie, even though it was necessary for my emotional and financial survival, was like amputating a part of myself. But each morning brought new discoveries, small joys, the bakery on the corner that made fresh bread every day, the Tai Chi group that met in the park at dawn, the municipal library 2 blocks away, with a book club for retirees. Slowly, I began to build a new routine, a new community, a new life. It's been 6 months since I moved into the apartment. The seasons changed, the leaves on the trees in the park fell and then sprouted again, and I too flourished in ways I never imagined possible. With the money from the house sale, I not only bought the apartment debt-free, but I also built a comfortable emergency fund and invested in a supplemental health plan that covered all the necessary treatments for my arthritis. For the first time in years, I didn't feel constant pain in my joints. The doctor told me I looked 10 years younger than when he first saw me. It's not just the medication, he explained during a checkup. It's the reduction of chronic stress. You were slowly killing yourself to support your son and daughter-in-law. I also started doing things I'd put off for decades. I enrolled in a painting class at the local community association, something I'd always wanted to do, but never had the time or money to prioritize. I discovered I had a natural talent for watercolors, especially landscapes. My teacher, a retired artist named Marcia, told me I had eyes that really see, one of the highest compliments I've ever received. Elena and I became travel companions. Nothing extravagant, just short weekend trips to nearby historic cities or quiet beaches. On one of those trips, we visited a fishing colony, and I was fascinated by the different pace of life, the simplicity, and the deep connection with nature. I took dozens of photos and then painted the sunset over the boats, a work that now hangs framed on my living room wall. I also found pleasure in small, everyday luxuries that once seemed extravagant. A cup of specialty coffee, bought whole beans, a good book purchased instead of borrowed from the library, a monthly therapeutic massage to help with my arthritis. These weren't excessive expenses. I was still living within my budget, but they were small kindnesses to myself, reminders that my comfort and well-being mattered. Carlos tried to contact me a few times in the first few months. The messages always followed the same pattern. They began with false concerns about my health or adjustment to the new apartment, quickly evolved into casual mentions of financial difficulties, and ended with direct requests for money. Each time, I politely responded that I was fine, but that I couldn't help financially. Eventually, the messages stopped altogether. Through common acquaintances, I learned they had moved to a smaller, cheaper apartment. Fernanda, for the first time since I'd met her, had gotten a steady job as a receptionist at a clinic. Carlos was working overtime at the company. They were living within their means, as adults should. One particularly beautiful Sunday morning, while I was sipping coffee on my balcony, watching the birds in the community garden, the intercom rang. It was the building's doorman. "Mrs. Sonia, your son is here," Should I let him up? My heart raced. I hadn't seen or spoken to Carlos in person since the discussion about selling the house. It had been 6 months. What did he want now? Part of me feared it was just another attempt at manipulation, another request for money disguised as a family visit. But another part of me, that part that would always be a mother, no matter what, wanted to believe that maybe he really was changing. Yes, you can let him up, I replied after a moment's hesitation. I opened the door before he knocked. Carlos looked different, thinner, with visible dark circles, but there was also something else in his eyes. A kind of maturity that hadn't been there before. Mom, he said simply. Carlos, I replied, holding the door open. Come in. He entered, looking around curiously. It was my first time visiting my new home. It's nice here, cozy. Thank you, I'm really liking it. An awkward silence settled between us. There were so many things left unsaid, so many open wounds, that it was hard to know where to begin. Coffee, I finally offered. Yes, please. In the kitchen, I silently made 2 cups. My movements were automatic as my mind raced. Why was I there? What did I want? Was I ready for another round of emotional manipulation? We returned to the living room, where Carlos was looking at my painting of the sunset over the fishing boats. You painted this? He asked, genuinely surprised. Yes, I started painting a few months ago. That's great, Mom. I didn't know you had this talent. Nor did I replied honestly. I never had time to find out before. Another silence. Carlos took a sip of coffee, seeming to gather the courage to say something. Mom, I came to apologize. He finally said, his voice low but firm. For the wedding, for lying to you, for everything, really. I remained silent, waiting for him to continue. It wouldn't be the first time he started with an apology that quickly turned into a request for money. These past few months have been difficult, he continued. We've had to move, cut back work more. Fernanda hates it, but I think we needed it. We needed to learn to live within our means. Yes, they did, I agreed, still cautious. At first, I blamed you. I thought you were being cruel, vindictive. But then I started doing the math. Let's see how much money you actually gave us over the years. It was shocking. I'd never stopped to add it all up. He looked down at his coffee cup as if he couldn't meet my gaze. And the worst part is, I never thanked you. I never really acknowledged the sacrifice you were making. I just expected it as if it were my right to receive your money, your help, your time. His words touched me deeply, but years of manipulation had made me cautious. What changed, Carlos? Why this sudden moment of clarity? He sighed. Fernanda is pregnant. Ah, there it was. The real reason for the visit. The real reason for the apologies. Once again, he needed something from me. Congratulations, I said, keeping my voice neutral. When's the due date? 7 months from now. And before you ask, no, I didn't come here to ask for money. I know what you're probably thinking, and I can't blame you. But it's not that. So, what is it, Carlos? The prospect of becoming a father made me reevaluate a lot of things. How did I treat you? How do I expect my own son or daughter to treat me? I realized I don't want to raise a child who sees me only as a source of money or resources. I want to raise someone who respects me, who values me for who I am, not for what I can give them. He paused, taking a deep breath. And to do that, I need to be that kind of person too. I need to show that kind of respect. Starting with you. His words sounded sincere, more genuine than anything he'd said to me in recent years. Still, there was a cautious voice inside me reminding me of all the times I'd been manipulated, all the empty promises. That sounds very nice, Carlos. But words are easy. What really matters are actions' consistency. I know. He nodded. And I don't expect you to just believe me now. I just wanted you to know that I'm trying to change, that I realize how wrong I was, and that if you're willing, I'd like to try to rebuild some kind of relationship not based on money or expectations, but on mutual respect. I looked at my son because, despite everything, he was still my son. And I saw in him a genuine vulnerability I hadn't seen in years. It wasn't the fake calculated vulnerability he and Fernanda had used to manipulate my generosity. It was something deeper, more real. It will take time, I finally replied. Many things had broken between us. Trust isn't rebuilt overnight. I know that, he said. I'm willing to wait to prove it with actions, not just words. I just ask for a chance. I looked out the window toward the garden where children were playing under the watchful eyes of their parents. In a few months, my grandson or granddaughter would be among them. The child wasn't to blame for his father's or mother's mistakes. And maybe, just maybe, the prospect of fatherhood had really awakened something better in Carlos. A chance I finally agreed. But with clear boundaries, no financial expectations, no emotional manipulation, a relationship between adults based on mutual respect. That's all I ask, she said, a small smile of relief appearing on her face. I don't know if our relationship will ever be fully repaired. The wounds run deep, and trust once broken is difficult to fully restore. But in that moment, I allowed myself a small glimmer of hope. My journey over the past few months has taught me a lot. I learned that love doesn't mean self-denial, that boundless generosity isn't kindness but codependency, that dignity and self-respect are gifts we give ourselves, not things others can take away from us. Today at 68, I feel more alive, more present, more myself than at any time in recent decades. My house is smaller, but my life is infinitely larger. My budget is tighter, but my possibilities are broader. My social circle is more restricted, but my connections are deeper and more authentic. I learned late, but not too late, the most important lesson, that the most crucial person to whom I owe loyalty, respect, and care is myself. And that lesson, however painful the learning process, is worth every tear shed, every sleepless night, every difficult confrontation. I don't know what the future holds for me with Carlos. I don't know if he's really changed or if this is just another phase in our complicated relationship. But I know that no matter what happens, I'll be okay, because I've finally learned to take care of myself with the same love, dedication, and generosity I used to reserve only for others. And this, more than anything else, is the true rebirth I experienced. Not a rebirth defined by material possessions or social status, but by the reconquest of my own dignity, my autonomy, and my intrinsic value as a human being. In the months following Carlos's visit, we maintained a cautious relationship. Bi-weekly lunches in public places, superficial conversations at first gradually deepening as trust slowly began to rebuild. Fernanda rarely participated in these encounters, and when she did, she remained distant, clearly uncomfortable with our new dynamic, in which money was no longer the center of gravity of the relationship. The birth of my granddaughter Beatrice brought a new dimension to the situation. The first time I held her in my arms, I felt a wave of unconditional love I hadn't experienced since Carlos was a baby. Her curious little eyes, her tiny fingers gripping my thumb, it was pure magic, pure innocence. Looking at her, I silently promised that our relationship would be different, that she would never see me as an ATM, but as a present, loving grandmother with healthy boundaries. "Does she look like you?" Carlos commented, watching us. "Do you think so?" I asked, surprised and moved by the comment. "Yes, she has your gaze determined even though she's so small. I smiled, acknowledging that she could be right. And perhaps that determination would help her follow a different path to build healthier relationships than the ones her parents had built. Helena once asked me if I regretted cutting off financial support for Carlos and Fernanda, especially now that there was a granddaughter in the mix. No, I replied without hesitation. It was the hardest thing I've ever done, but also the most necessary, not just for me, but for them as well. How so? She asked, genuinely curious. Allowing them to continue exploiting me wouldn't truly help them. I'd be perpetuating a toxic cycle, a relationship based on transactions rather than genuine affection. Sometimes true love requires setting boundaries, even when it hurts. Helena nodded understanding. And you think they've really changed? I thought about it for a moment. Carlos is trying. I see genuine signs of effort, of self-reflection. Fernanda, well, she's more resilient, but the simple fact that they're now living within their own means that they've taken responsibility for their financial choices. That's already a significant change. Today, at 69, I look at my small apartment filled with watercolors. I painted books I read and souvenirs from trips I took, and I feel profound gratitude. Not for what I lost, although the pain of betrayal and exploitation never fully goes away, but for what I gained: self-knowledge, self-determination, and a deeper understanding of what it means to truly love both others and myself. In every small choice I make, prioritizing my well-being, every healthy boundary I set, every moment of joy I allow myself without guilt, I am rewriting the story of my life. No longer as a supporting character in other people's drama, but as the protagonist of my own journey. If there's one lesson I'd like to share with anyone facing a similar situation, it would be this: true love never demands your self-destruction. He never asks you to make yourself small so others can grow. He never charges you a price you can't pay without losing yourself in the process. And for those who, like me, discovered too late that they mistook exploitation for love, know that it's never too late to change, to rise up, to start over. True strength lies not in silently enduring abuse in the name of love, but in having the courage to say no when necessary, even and especially to those we love the most. Now, if you enjoyed this story, click on this next video that appears on the screen, because it contains a story of betrayal and twists and turns you've never seen before.